We live in a world obsessed with the bright side of things. Personality tests, horoscopes, and self-help advice all tell us to play to our strengths, to cultivate the gifts we're given, to shine in the light. But Carl Jung, the great explorer of the unconscious, knew a deeper truth, that every strength has a shadow. Every light casts darkness. And until you face that darkness, your shadow side, you remain a prisoner to the very traits you're most proud of. This is nowhere more true than with the signs of the Zodiac. For centuries, we've looked to the stars for meaning. Aries is the courageous leader, Taurus the loyal builder, Gemini the curious thinker, Cancer the nurturing soul. But these are only half-truths. Each sign contains within it the seeds of its own undoing, a set of unconscious patterns that, left unchecked, can turn a gift into a curse. Jung called this the shadow, the rejected, denied, or hidden parts of the self. It's not evil, but it is uncomfortable. It's the side of you that you try to ignore, but which comes out in moments of stress, conflict, or crisis. The shadow is not something to destroy, but to integrate, to become aware of, to work with, and to transform into wisdom. Let's start with Aries, the first sign of the Zodiac. Aries' energy is direct, bold, pioneering. Jung might say the Aries archetype embodies the hero's journey, the call to action, the willingness to confront the unknown. But the shadow side of Aries is just as powerful. That same drive for independence can turn into aggression, impatience, or reckless selfishness. The Aries shadow is the urge to win at any cost, to dominate rather than cooperate, to confuse action with wisdom. When an Aries refuses to acknowledge this part of themselves, they may find themselves in constant conflict, not just with others, but with their own deeper needs for connection and rest. Jung would remind the Aries that the only real victory is over the self. The challenge is to channel that fiery energy not just outward, but inward, to fight the battles that matter, and to learn the art of surrender when brute force fails. Integration comes when Aries learns that courage is not just about starting fights, but about ending them with grace. Next, Taurus, the earthbound builder, lover of stability, comfort, and beauty. Taurus is strong, loyal, grounded. But the shadow side is stubbornness, possessiveness, and an inability to adapt. Taurus may cling to routines, relationships, or material possessions long past their expiration date. The fear of change becomes a prison, turning security into stagnation. Jung taught that every fixation is a symptom of a deeper anxiety. Taurus may convince themselves that by holding on, they're preserving something valuable, but in reality, they're avoiding the discomfort of growth. For Taurus, integration means learning to let go, to see that true security does not come from holding on, but from trusting one's own ability to rebuild, to reinvent, to thrive in uncertainty. When Taurus faces the shadow, they discover a deeper strength, resilience, the power to root themselves not just in things, but in their own evolving spirit. It's easy to see why people prefer the light. It feels good to identify with our best traits, to receive praise for our strengths. But Jung knew that wholeness is not achieved by denying darkness, but by embracing it. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It reveals the places where you are not yet free, the patterns that limit your growth, the wounds that, if healed, become your greatest wisdom. So, as we begin this journey through the Zodiac's shadow, remember, the goal is not self-criticism, but self-knowledge. To look at the parts of yourself you'd rather avoid, not with shame, but with curiosity and courage. Because in the end, it is only by integrating the shadow that you become truly whole. The stars above do not dictate your fate, but their symbols can guide you to the places within that are waiting to be seen, understood, and transformed. This is the promise of Jung's psychology and of the Zodiac's deeper wisdom, that every sign contains both light and shadow, and your destiny is not to escape one or the other, but to become conscious of both. When you peer into the shadow, what you find isn't a monster, but a mirror, one that reveals both the beauty and the brokenness inside every sign. Jung warned that most people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid confronting their own soul. But if you want to grow, to heal, to stop running from yourself, you have to look steadily, honestly, at both the mask you wear and what lies behind it. Nowhere is this tension more apparent than in the twin sign, Gemini. At its best, Gemini is the communicator, the questioner, the eternal student. Ruled by Mercury, Gemini energy is agile, curious, adaptable. These are the people who can talk to anyone, charm a room, find patterns others miss. But the shadow side is just as quick, just as changeable. Gemini's gift for flexibility can become restlessness, a tendency to skim the surface, to avoid depth for the sake of novelty. Their wit, so dazzling, can also be a shield, deflecting difficult truths, dodging emotional vulnerability, talking in circles to avoid uncomfortable silence. In Jungian language, Gemini's shadow is the trickster, the archetype that delights in ambiguity, that refuses to be pinned down, that values cleverness over authenticity. But cleverness alone is not wisdom. When Gemini becomes a prisoner of their own clever mind, they risk becoming scattered, unfocused, even duplicitous. The fear of being trapped by a commitment, by a feeling, by a truth, can drive them to run from the very connections that would nourish their soul. The challenge for Gemini is to slow down, to choose depth over distraction, to listen as much as they speak. Jung would ask, where are you running from? What deeper truth waits beneath all that chatter? Integration comes when Gemini dares to stand still, to drop the mask, to sit in the discomfort of uncertainty, to discover that real freedom comes not from endless motion, but from honest presence. In facing the shadow, Gemini learns that words can heal, not just distract. That communication is not just performance, but communion. Next is Cancer, the sign of the crab, soft inside, hard outside. Cancer is the nurturer, the protector, the soul of home and family. This is the sign most attuned to the ebb and flow of feeling, to memory, to the pull of the past. At their best, Cancers create safe harbors for themselves and others. But their shadow is just as deep. The same need to protect can become smothering, possessive, or manipulative. Cancer's sensitivity, when wounded, may turn inward into self-pity, moodiness, or a tendency to hold on to old hurts long after they should have been released. Jung would say that Cancer's shadow is the mother complex, an over-identification with care to the point where nurturing becomes control and love becomes a way to avoid abandonment or rejection. Cancer may fear loss so much that they retreat into their shell, shutting out the world rather than risk another wound. Or, just as easily, they may try to bind others to them through guilt or emotional intensity. The fear of vulnerability becomes a prison, trapping Cancer in cycles of longing and regret. For Cancer, the path to integration is about learning to nurture without losing oneself. Jung believed that real care is never about sacrifice or control, but about presence, a willingness to be with another person's pain and your own without trying to fix or possess it. The healthy Cancer knows how to create boundaries, to let go of the past, to trust that love does not require captivity. In facing the shadow, Cancer discovers the strength beneath their softness and the freedom that comes from letting go. When you consider Gemini and Cancer side by side, a pattern emerges, two signs so different on the surface, yet each wrestling with the fear of depth. Gemini runs from feeling, Cancer clings to it. Gemini avoids commitment, Cancer fears abandonment. Both are searching for security, for a sense of belonging, but each approaches the quest from opposite directions. Jung's wisdom was always to seek the middle path, to find the place where difference becomes dialogue, where tension becomes creativity. The stars, like the psyche, are full of paradox. Every sign contains its own solution. Gemini must learn to feel. Cancer must learn to release. The shadow is not a flaw, but a doorway. When you have the courage to open it, to step through, you find not just the wound, but the medicine. This is the great promise of Jungian psychology, that every part of you, light and shadow, joy and sorrow, clarity and confusion, has a role to play in the unfolding of your soul. The signs of the zodiac are not destinies, but maps. They show you where you are strong, where you are vulnerable, and, most importantly, where you are unconscious. To become conscious is to become whole. So ask yourself, what truth do you avoid? What feeling do you cling to? What gift waits inside your wound? The answers are never easy, but they're always worth the search. In the end, the journey through the zodiac's shadow is the journey into your own depths. The place where, as Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. As the zodiac wheel turns, we move from the fluctuating tides of Cancer into the full blaze of summer. Leo, the sign of the lion. Leo is the king or queen of the zodiac, the performer, the source of radiant warmth and creative power. At their best, Leos light up any room. They lead with heart, are generous with praise, and seek to inspire others with their vision and vitality. In the Jungian sense, Leo carries the archetype of the sovereign, the inner monarch who believes in their own dignity, who brings order, creativity, and purpose to their world. But every kingdom casts a shadow, and for Leo, that shadow is pride, sometimes so great it tips into arrogance, vanity, or the need for constant admiration. The Leo shadow is the part that cannot bear to go unnoticed, that withers without applause, that confuses self-worth with attention. At its extreme, this can manifest as narcissism, a refusal to see one's own flaws, a need to be at the center no matter the cost, a deep insecurity masked by bravado. Jung saw the shadow as most dangerous when it is denied or projected onto others. The Leo who refuses to acknowledge their need for validation may find themselves caught in endless dramas, creating crises or seeking conflict just to remain the star. Or, feeling wounded by a lack of recognition, they may retreat into sulking, resentment, or melodrama. The real pain comes from a disconnect with the authentic self. Leo forgets that the true source of their light is internal, not external. Integration for Leo is learning humility, the understanding that greatness is not diminished by vulnerability, and that leadership is not about domination, but service. When a Leo can step off the stage and let others shine, or can face their own imperfection without shame, they embody the highest form of the sovereign, the wise, loving ruler who inspires loyalty not through fear, but through authentic presence. Jung would remind the Leo that your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Now, the wheel turns to Virgo, the sign of the maiden and the healer. Virgo is practical, precise, analytical. drawn to order, improvement, and service. In the Jungian framework, Virgo is the archetype of the analyst or the alchemist, the one who seeks to transform the world and themselves through careful attention and devotion to detail. Virgo's strength is their discernment. They see what others miss, notice what needs fixing, and strive tirelessly to make life better for those around them. But the Virgo shadow is perfectionism, a relentless, often merciless inner critic. The same eye that can spot a problem can turn inward, becoming self-punishing, anxious, or chronically dissatisfied. Virgo's desire to serve can morph into martyrdom, resentment, or control. They may judge others harshly, but none more than themselves. The fear of making a mistake, of being not enough, can become paralyzing, leading to overthinking, procrastination, or withdrawal. Jung noted that the drive for perfection often conceals a deep wound, the fear of unworthiness, of being fundamentally flawed. Virgo's shadow can manifest as compulsive fixing, as if they can clean or organize away their pain, or alternately as a cold attachment, using intellect to avoid feeling. The real task for Virgo is to accept imperfection, not as failure, but as the soil from which true growth emerges. Integration for Virgo comes when they learn compassion, first for themselves, then for others. When Virgo lets go of the illusion of control and embraces the messiness of being human, they become healers in the truest sense. Their care is no longer a defense against chaos, but a bridge to genuine connection. Jung would say, wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration. For Virgo, this means honoring both the critic and the creator within. It's important to see how Leo and Virgo, though so different on the surface, share a similar struggle: quest for worth. Leo seeks it in the eyes of others, Virgo in the demands of the inner judge. Both must face the fear that they are not enough. Leo fears being invisible, Virgo fears being inadequate. Both must risk failure, imperfection, and even humility to find their real strength. In confronting their shadows, Leo and Virgo have the chance to transform not just themselves, but the people around them. Leo's generosity, when freed from vanity, inspires others to believe in their own light. Virgo's care, when freed from criticism, becomes a healing balm in a wounded world. Together, these signs teach that true leadership and service arise not from a place of superiority, but from vulnerability, authenticity, and deep self-acceptance. So, if you see yourself in Leo's hunger for approval or Virgo's relentless striving, ask, what am I really seeking? Where does my value come from? What would it mean to accept myself, not in spite of my flaws, but because of them? Jung would urge you to sit with the discomfort, to befriend your shadow, to listen for the wisdom beneath the wound, because the path to wholeness runs straight through the darkness. And only those willing to face their own shadow can bring light to the world. Beyond the warmth of Leo's fire and Virgo's earthbound analysis, the Zodiac moves into autumn, the season of balance and decay, of harvest and letting go. Here, we encounter the complexity of Libra and the intensity of Scorpio, two signs whose shadows are as potent as their gifts. Libra stands for harmony, partnership, and justice. The Libran archetype is the diplomat, the artist, the seeker of balance. Libra brings people together, finds the middle ground, and strives for beauty in all things: relationships, environments, and ideas. On the surface, Libra is gentle, fair-minded, gracious. But as Jung insisted, every mask contains its opposite, every virtue its shadow. For Libra, That shadow is indecision and self-betrayal. The same desire to keep the peace can become a fear of conflict so great that Libra will silence their own needs, desires, and even values just to maintain harmony. They become chameleons, molding themselves to please others, losing touch with their own truth. This is the danger of the persona, Jung's term for the social mask we show the world. For Libra, the persona becomes a prison. The more they please others, the less they know themselves. Beneath the gracious exterior, Libra's shadow may fester as passive aggression, suppressed resentment, or quiet despair. They may feel empty in relationships that lack authenticity, or become paralyzed when forced to choose. Jung taught that real balance is not static, but dynamic, a dance between opposites, an acceptance of both beauty and discomfort. The path to integration for Libra is learning to honor their own voice, even when it risks discord. True peace, Jung would say, is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice, of honest self-expression. Libra must realize that saying yes to everyone else often means saying no to themselves. The healing comes when Libra can face disagreement, disappointment, or even loneliness for the sake of authenticity. Only then can their natural gift for connection become a source of genuine, not performative, harmony. In relationships, Libra's shadow often surfaces as a reluctance to define boundaries. They may stay in situations that are nice but empty, or avoid necessary endings. Jung saw this as a refusal to confront the shadow of relationship, the truth that love, to be real, must make space for both closeness and conflict. The gift is in discovering that beauty is not the absence of rough edges, but the courage to embrace the whole. Now, from Libra's air, we plunge into the deep water of Scorpio, the sign of transformation, power, and emotional depth. Scorpio's archetype is the alchemist, the sorcerer, the phoenix. Scorpio is drawn to the hidden, the taboo, the places where others fear to tread. At their best, Scorpios are courageous truth-tellers, able to see into the hearts of others, unafraid of darkness, be it in themselves or the world. But Scorpio's shadow is formidable. Their search for depth can become obsession, their emotional intensity, manipulation, or control. The Scorpio who denies their shadow may become secretive, vindictive, or consumed by jealousy and mistrust. In Jungian terms, Scorpio is often possessed by the shadow of power, the belief that to be safe, one must dominate, possess, or punish. This is the danger of being too closely identified with the underworld. The gifts of transformation are lost to cycles of destruction. Scorpio's pain is often rooted in betrayal, real or imagined. Wounded, they may build walls so high that no one can reach them, or strike preemptively to avoid being hurt first. Their greatest fear is vulnerability. Their greatest longing is for intimacy, so real it leaves no room for secrets. Jung taught that the shadow, when denied, will sabotage every relationship, every hope for healing. Only by facing their own darkness can Scorpio become the true alchemist, turning poison into medicine. Integration for Scorpio begins with radical honesty, first with themselves, then with others. It requires the courage to name their desires, fears, and wounds, and to trust that intimacy does not require control. When Scorpio lets go of the need to master every situation, they discover the regenerative power of surrender. The Scorpion transforms into the eagle, not by avoiding pain, but by soaring above it, seeing the bigger picture, embracing the mystery of life and death, attachment and release. Jung's insight into the shadow is especially relevant here. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. For Scorpio, that means accepting both the darkness and the light, both passion and peace. Only then can their love be truly transformative, their power truly healing. If you recognize yourself in Libra's longing for peace or Scorpio's hunger for truth, ask, where am I avoiding conflict? Where am I wielding power instead of sharing vulnerability? What's the cost of staying hidden, of staying silent? The answers, as always, are uncomfortable, but they're the only way through. Together, Libra and Scorpio remind us that shadow work is not about becoming good, but about becoming real. It is not about perfecting the persona, but about dissolving it, so that what remains is not the mask, but the living soul. The wheel turns, the seasons shift, and the journey continues. With each sign, you meet a new part of yourself, each one carrying its own gifts, wounds, and lessons. Jung would say that the point is not to conquer your shadow, but to befriend it, because in the end, your wholeness depends not on the light you project, but on the darkness you integrate. As the Zodiac's journey moves from the intensity of Scorpio's deep waters, we're thrust out into the open skies of Sagittarius, the sign of the seeker, the philosopher, the eternal wanderer. Sagittarius carries the archetype of the explorer, ever reaching, ever learning, always chasing the next horizon. At their best, Sagittarians are optimists and visionaries, lovers of freedom, adventure, and higher meaning. Their enthusiasm is contagious, their faith in possibility seemingly unbreakable. But as Jung would say, every light casts a shadow. For Sagittarius, that shadow is escapism and dogmatism. The same hunger for adventure can morph into restlessness, a refusal to commit, or a chronic dissatisfaction with the present. Sagittarians, desperate to avoid limitation, may flee boredom, discomfort, or intimacy, always chasing a dream that's just out of reach. Their optimism, when unchecked, can become arrogance. The belief that their truth is the only truth, or that their ideals justify disregard for the feelings and realities of others. Jung's insight into the shadow of meaning is particularly apt here. He warned that the search for meaning can become its own kind of evasion, a way to avoid pain, accountability, or self-examination. The Sagittarian who is forever seeking new knowledge or new lands may do so to escape the hard work of living in the here and now. They can become preachers rather than partners, more invested in being right than being real. Sagittarius must confront the paradox that true freedom is not the absence of boundaries, but the conscious choice of which boundaries to honor. Integration for Sagittarius comes through grounded wisdom, learning to find wonder in the ordinary, to commit to a path even when it grows difficult, to allow other truths to coexist with their own. The shadow is not conquered by running from it, but by sitting still long enough to listen to what it has to say. As the archer faces their shadow, they discover a deeper form of adventure, the journey inward. Only by coming home to themselves, by embracing the lessons of limitation and humility, can they fulfill their promise as teachers and guides. As Jung might say, your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Next, we descend into the earthiness of Capricorn, the sign of the mountain goat, steadfast, ambitious, and determined. Capricorn's archetype is the builder, the sage, the elder. They climb, they endure, they manifest visions into form. Capricorn is patient, responsible, and realistic, often carrying burdens that others shy away from. They know the value of discipline and the wisdom of tradition. Yet, Capricorn's shadow is as deep as the roots of the mountain they climb. Their determination can turn into coldness, rigidity, or workaholism. Capricorn may hide vulnerability behind a stoic mask, fearing that any sign of weakness will undermine their authority. The desire to achieve can become obsession, leading to emotional distance, isolation, and a sense of never being enough. At times, Capricorns may become cynical, seeing only obstacles, or judgmental, dismissing what they cannot control. Jung's understanding of the shadow is crucial here. The shadow of achievement can drive Capricorn to sacrifice joy, relationships, or even health in the pursuit of status or security. Beneath the hard exterior, there may be a deep fear of failure, shame about their own needs, or an unacknowledged longing for approval. The goat climbs because it fears what might happen if it stands still. Yet, Jung would remind us that growth requires not just ascent, but descent, a willingness to enter the valleys of emotion and vulnerability, not just the heights of accomplishment. Integration for Capricorn comes through self-compassion and the courage to be seen as human, not just as strong or successful. When Capricorn can admit their limits, ask for help, and allow themselves moments of rest or play, they access a new kind of strength, the strength of authenticity. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For Capricorn, this means dropping the armor of perfection and letting others in, even at the risk of imperfection. Sagittarius and Capricorn, side by side, represent the tension between vision and reality, faith and discipline, the quest for meaning and the work of building a life. Both face the danger of becoming so identified with their quest, whether for freedom or success, that they lose touch with their own hearts. The shadow whispers that there is never enough experience, never enough achievement, never enough certainty. But Jung's wisdom points another way. Enough is found not by conquering the world, but by befriending your own shadow. If you see yourself in Sagittarius' endless search, ask, what am I running from? What would happen if I simply stayed? If you resonate with Capricorn's relentless striving, ask, who am I beneath my achievements? What part of me is asking for rest, for tenderness, for forgiveness? The Zodiac's wheel turns, and each sign's shadow becomes a necessary part of the human journey. To integrate the shadow is not to destroy ambition, vision, or adventure, but to ground them in humility, compassion, and real connection. As Jung might say, it is in the marriage of opposites, of light and dark, ascent and descent, that wholeness is born. And so, as Sagittarius learns to dwell in the present, and Capricorn learns to soften into their humanity, the path toward integration continues. The journey through shadow does not end. It only deepens, revealing new layers of the self waiting to be discovered. At the edge of the Zodiac, the journey reaches its most mysterious, collective, and ultimately transcendent signs: Aquarius and Pisces. In Jungian psychology, these archetypes reflect the struggle between individuality and universality, vision and dissolution, logic and mysticism. Their gifts are great, but their shadows can be the most elusive and the most profound. Aquarius is the sign of the water bearer, the visionary, the rebel, the humanist. Aquarians are known for their originality, idealism, and devotion to the collective. They imagine new worlds, break old systems, and champion the causes of the marginalized. Their archetype is the innovator or the futurist, always thinking ahead, always questioning what is in favor of what could be. At their best, Aquarians are brave enough to stand alone and wise enough to gather a community around new ideals. Yet the shadow of Aquarius is detachment, a tendency to live so much in the realm of ideas that emotion, intimacy, and the ordinary rhythms of life are neglected or dismissed. Aquarian rebellion, when cut off from empathy, can become coldness or even contempt for tradition and human limitations. The passion for the group can turn into alienation, as if the Aquarian must always be apart, above or against. They risk losing themselves in abstraction, fighting for causes but forgetting the needs and feelings of the individual, including their own. Jung would see the Aquarian shadow as the negative animus, a fixation on rationality and progress that denies the necessity of feeling, embodiment, and roots. The risk is arrogance, the assumption that I see what others cannot, so I do not have to play by the rules. But the isolated genius is a lonely figure. The price of too much distance is disconnection, not only from others, but from one's own humanity. Integration for Aquarius means coming down from the tower of ideas and entering the messy, beautiful world of the heart. It means allowing themselves to feel as deeply as they think, to honor the wisdom of tradition as much as the thrill of revolution. When Aquarians risk vulnerability, they become true leaders, not because they are above others, but because they are with them. Jung would remind Aquarius, a group experience takes place on a lower level of consciousness than the experience of an individual. The challenge is to remember both, to be visionary and relatable, to champion the collective without losing the self. Now the wheel turns to the last sign, Pisces, the sign of the mystic, the dreamer, the artist, the healer. Pisces embodies the Jungian archetype of the divine child or the old soul, a soul that feels the suffering and beauty of the world in equal measure. Pisceans are compassionate, intuitive, and spiritually attuned, often living with one foot in another realm. Their empathy is profound, their imagination boundless. But Pisces' shadow is escapism and victimhood. The same sensitivity that allows them to connect deeply can also overwhelm, leading to retreat into fantasy, addiction, or self-pity. Pisces may martyr themselves for others, blurring boundaries to the point where they no longer know where they end and someone else begins. They risk being consumed by sorrow, carrying wounds for the whole world but neglecting to heal themselves. Jung described this as the danger of the participation mystique, a loss of individuation, the merging of the self with the collective unconscious. Pisces must confront the temptation to dissolve, to disappear, to avoid pain by refusing to confront it directly. Their path to integration is about learning boundaries, not as barriers, but as containers for their compassion and gifts. When Pisces brings their vision down to earth, when they turn their healing energy on themselves as well as others, they become true channels for transcendence. Their art, their care, their presence becomes medicine, not just for others, but for their own soul. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For Pisces, this means swimming not just in the currents of collective feeling, but also learning to anchor, to discern, and to choose. Integration comes when they realize that true spiritual power comes not from escaping the world, but from loving it, all of it, without losing themselves in the process. Together, Aquarius and Pisces complete the Zodiac circle, holding the tension between the personal and the universal, thought and feeling, rebellion and surrender. The shadow side of these signs is seductive because it promises escape from pain, into utopia or into oblivion. But Jungian wisdom teaches that freedom is not found in flight, but in integration, not in the denial of limits, but in their conscious embrace. As the journey through the Zodiac's shadow ends, you may see yourself reflected in every sign, every lesson, every wound. The task is not to disown the darkness, but to befriend it, to bring it into the light of awareness, where it can become a source of creativity, wisdom, and connection. The stars do not dictate your destiny, but their stories can illuminate your own. Your shadow is not your enemy, but your guide. What have you learned in these depths? Perhaps that your greatest struggles are linked to your greatest gifts. That wholeness does not mean perfection, but presence. Perhaps, like Jung, you now see that to be fully alive is to walk between opposites, to hold the tension of light and shadow without needing to resolve it, to find meaning in the very heart of mystery. This is the true power of the Zodiac, not to fix your fate, but to mirror your journey. And this is the message of Jung's psychology. The darkness you fear is the darkness you must enter, for it is there that you will find not only your shadow, but your soul.